Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. We're reading today from Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980 because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Friday, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, TGIF, or whatever it is for you. It's Anything Goes Friday, although in our second hour today, Congressman Ro Khanna will be with us for the full hour taking your calls, so get ready for that. There's a bunch of stuff in the news, though, that I wanted to talk about before we kick off our program today. I think that this will occupy all 3 hours of our program easily. First of all, just some news stuff. Donald Trump has added Alan Dershowitz and Ken Starr to his impeachment team, along with Pam Bondi. Just to refresh your memory, Alan Dershowitz is the guy who has been accused by Jeffrey Epstein's victims of being one of the men who showed up on Rape Island repeatedly. And Dershowitz, in response, said, well, I never took my underwear off when I got those massages. Ken Starr was the guy who prosecuted Bill Clinton and demanded witnesses be called. And in fact, interrogated, it was a 4-year-long investigation, interrogated all kinds of witnesses. But Ken Starr was kicked out as president of Baylor University because he was doing a, shall we say, bad job of prosecuting sexual assault claims against Baylor University football players, basically of, assaulting and raping women at Baylor University. And so Ken Starr had to leave his job there. And then Pam Bondi, back in 2013, she was the Attorney General of Florida. The previous Attorney General had started an investigation into Trump University for fraud. She inherited that, and Donald Trump's foundation, he was not yet president, he was, it was 2013, Donald Trump's foundation gave her a substantial campaign contribution illegally, and she dropped the charges, dropped the investigation. So somebody tweeted, I guess Dracula and Hitler's ghost were not available. All right. So there's that, number one. Number two, there's something that Lev Parnas said in his interviews with Rachel Maddow that I think are really consequential and would like your help on this. Lev Parnas tells the story of how Donald Trump fired our ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, at least 4 or 5 times. Donald Trump kept ordering people around him to fire Marie Yovanovitch, and they kept not doing it. And Parnas also says they were afraid that if they kept not firing her, he would fire her with a tweet. Now, this isn't the first time we've heard from White House insiders, and in fact, I'm going to get to that part in just a second, that Donald Trump is irrational and gives stupid orders that his staff ignores. I mean, this was the essence of the whole anonymous book and op-ed in the Washington Post a couple of years ago. But this raises a really interesting question. Is it possible that the only time Donald Trump tweets something like, firing Rex Tillerson or withdrawing our troops from Syria and turning, basically stabbing the Kurds in the back, abandoning the Kurds in Syria, to death and torture and all kinds of horrible things as Erdogan and his troops go charging in? Is it possible that when he tweets something like that, it's because he gave the order to multiple people around him and they all refused to do it because it was insane? And so he resorts to Twitter to do it. And then, because remember when he tweeted about how we're pulling our troops out of Syria? The news stories were like, the Pentagon is blindsided. The State Department doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, probably because he pitched it to the Secretary of State or to the Chief Secretary of Defense, and they said, no, you're nuts. I'm not going to do that. And so he just went ahead and tweeted it. Now, if this is the case, what would be fascinating, and this is where I'm asking for your help, would be to compile a list, and you can do this, you can just post these to my Twitter feed, and I will read them. Just tweet it at me, at Thom_Hartmann, with 2 N's. Would be to compile a list of Trump's tweets when, and I spent some time this morning looking for them, but it's just like there's so many, and it's just, I was just overwhelmed. But, come up with a list of times when Trump has tweeted policy. He has fired somebody, he has proclaimed something, he has, he's tweeted policy. And look back and see if those were always times when the people around him said no. And what really brings this to mind is this extraordinary piece in today's Washington Post. There's a book coming out in a couple of weeks, January 21st. A new book is coming out. It's titled A Very Stable Genius, Donald J. Trump's Testing of America. And Carol Leonig and Phil Rucker wrote basically a summary of one of the chapters of that book in today's Washington Post. And I want to just lay some of this out for you, and I encourage you to go to WashingtonPost.com and read the entire article. It is shocking. So, when Trump put together his America First thing, Mattis, Tillerson, Cohen, I'm quoting from the article now, feared his proposals were rash, barely considered, and a danger to America's superpower standing. They also felt that many of Trump's impulsive ideas stemmed from his lack of familiarity with U.S. history and even where countries were located. So they wanted to have a shared language and a shared database between themselves and him. So they put together this kind of PowerPoint presentation with lots of slides and graphics and visuals. This is July 20th, 2017. Mattis was there. This is in a room called the Tank, which is, like the sacred room for the generals. And Trump was there, Tillerson was there, Cohen was there, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Joseph Dunford was there, Pence was there, Tillerson, if I didn't already say that, Steve Mnuchin, and Steve Bannon. And they did this 90-minute presentation where Mattis and Tillerson and Cohen took turns talking about, here's the situation of America and American troops all around the world. And Trump would periodically interrupt them. Here, another quote from the article. When they used the word base, it prompted him to launch into, say, how, quote, crazy and how, quote, stupid it was to pay for bases in some countries. We should charge them rent, Trump said of South Korea. We should make them pay for our soldiers. We should make money off everything. Trump proceeded to explain that NATO, too, was worthless. We're owed money you haven't been collecting, Trump told them. You could totally go bankrupt if you had to run your own businesses. You would totally go bankrupt. So things were kind of going down in flames. The general tries to calmly explain to Trump that, NATO allies don't owe the United States rent or anything. And that the NATO alliance not only protects Europe, it protects America. This is what keeps us safe, Mattis said. These are commitments that keep us safe. Trump then, changes topics and starts ranting about the Iran deal. It's the worst deal in history, Trump declared. Well, actually, Tillerson says, I don't want to hear it, Trump says. We're getting out of it. I keep telling you. I keep giving you time, and you keep delaying me. I want out of it. And then somebody mentioned Afghanistan, and he says, that was a loser war. And then he turns to the generals, and he says, you're all losers. You don't know how to win anymore. Trump questioned why the United States, from the article, why the United States couldn't get some oil as payment for the troops stationed in the Persian Gulf. We spent $7 trillion. They're ripping us off. Where's the effing oil? He says, maybe I should remove General John Nicholson. This is the guy who's in charge of U.S. troops in Afghanistan. I don't think he knows how to win, says Trump. Dunford sought to explain that Nicholson hadn't been charged with annihilating the enemy in Afghanistan, but instead with gradually reducing the military presence in the country and trying to train locals to maintain a stable government. Trump replied, I want to win. We don't win wars anymore. We spend $7 trillion. Everybody else got the oil, and we're not winning anymore. Trump was by now in one of his rages. He was so angry that he wasn't taking many breaths. I wouldn't go to war with you people. You're a bunch of dopes and babies. Now, at this point, these generals in the room are getting seriously upset. I mean, this is the guy who in 1968 got out of going to Vietnam by saying he had bone spurs. They note the more perplexing silence was from Pence, who should have been able to stand up to Trump. Instead, one attendee said, quote, he's sitting there frozen like a statue. Why didn't he stop the president? Another person said, a total deer in headlights. So Trump is ranting at them, and Tillerson says, no, that's just wrong. Mr. President, you're totally wrong. None of that is true. Tillerson's dad and uncle had both volunteered for World War II. Tillerson says, the men and women who put on uniforms don't do it to become soldiers of fortune. That's not why they put on the uniform and go out and die. They do it to protect our freedom. There was silence in the tank. Trump gets up and walks out. And Tillerson turns to the group and says, he's an effing moron. They note in the article that the tank meeting had so thoroughly shocked the conscience of military leaders that they tried to keep it a secret. This is the guy who's president. When Nancy Pelosi says that he's a danger to America and a danger to world peace, she is not exaggerating. That is not hyperbole. That's not something that she's saying to try and get people in favor of impeachment. This guy should not be running our country. We and the entire world are in danger every day that Donald Trump stays in the White House. It's 17 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday. I've got a few other stories here I want to share with you. I'll come back on the other side of this break with them, and then we'll be picking up your calls for the rest of the day.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Although all of the second hour, instead of getting answers from me, you'll be getting them from Congressman Ro Khanna of the 17th District of California. And welcome back. Diane in Waco, Texas. Hey, Diane, what's up? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hello, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Okay. I have a question. Okay, remember back when the Ukraine scandal...
Diane, can you get your mouth closer to your telephone's microphone? Because I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you remember when the Ukraine scandal first happened, when the whistleblower went to IG and the IG bar and bar dismissed.
Diane, I'm sorry. I'm going to put you on hold because you keep popping in and out, and I'm not sure why. And Joyce, she's on line 3. Maybe you guys can figure out what's going on there because I want to hear what Diane's saying, but I can't hear her. Brad in Springfield, Wisconsin. Hey, Brad, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I wanted to bring to the listeners' attention that the Trump administration, his Social Security Administrator, Andrew Saul, has proposed rule change to make cuts to Social Security disability and supplemental security income, which
right,
are
to require every 6 months that you renew your eligibility rather than what is typically right now about every 2 years. Yeah.
Well, it's more frequent continuing disability reviews, and that would put undue stress and hardship on these ill and disabled folks, and the result would be to kick hundreds of thousands of them off. This was done under the Reagan administration. There was such a public outcry because of the suffering and deaths that ensued. Had to be reversed in 1982 and 1984.
Yeah, as I recall, over 10,000 people died that they could trace right back to that.
A lot of people did, and it's pretty scary what they're trying to do. The comment period right now is currently open until January 31st if folks want to contact Social Security to either online or over the phone and let them know, that they oppose this
right.
proposed rule change. It would be really helpful for our most vulnerable citizens.
Is there an easy link off SSA.gov to the comment period to comment on these on this proposed policy change?
I'm not sure. I'm sure that could be found quite easily just by Googling SSDI comment period rule change.
Yeah. That would probably do it.
I'm sorry I don't have that link, but it's something significant that is flown under the radar in the news cycle.
Yeah, no, we've talked about it several times in this program over the last week or so, and it's reprehensible. I mean, in my opinion, it's the cruelty. It's just, I think that there are people in this Trump administration, like Stephen Miller, who just delight off seeing other people suffer. I can't come up with any other explanation.
Yeah.
I mean, kids in cages.
So hopefully that they'll reconsider if enough folks do comment. And
the other thing you can do is you can call your member of Congress and raise holy hell about this, because they can offer both moral persuasion and they may end up having to pass some kind of legislation to restrain Trump from doing this. And that number is 202-225-3121. Brad, I got to run, but thanks for the call. Great points all. We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Anything Goes Friday, although I do have a couple more news stories for you. Stick around. Okay, I want to get back to just a few other pieces of news here that I think are consequential. I think this thing about Trump tweeting to get around people around him trying to prevent him from breaking the law or doing something stupid or sabotaging America's defense interests, as he did when he tweeted that we were pulling our troops out of Syria, I think that's a big deal. Other news stories. This is from the Associated Press, APnews.com. The headline, expert, Georgia election server showed signs of tampering. You'll recall on this program, we covered this actually at some length back in 2016, as I recall, a couple of years ago anyway, 3-4 years ago. There was this computer expert. His name is Lamb. His last name is Lamb. And Logan Lamb. And he was poking around and discovered that the main server for the Georgia elections was available on the internet, and he could get into it. And he reported this, and the FBI came and took basically a snapshot of the server, and then he sued to get, Kennesaw State University, I believe it was, the college where he goes, or where he teaches, sued to get the server. And right after that lawsuit, the day after that lawsuit was filed, this was March 2nd, 2017, the server was wiped clean. So, it took them years. They finally got these this year. It took them years to get the copy of the server from the FBI. And what this guy says is that when he looks at the copy of the server, first of all, he found the personal data for Georgia's, this is when he was just looking at it online, personal data for Georgia's 6.7 million voters, as well as passwords used by county officials to access election staging files. But he also says he found the digital fingerprints of somebody having hacked this server. And it was somebody very sophisticated, because 20 minutes after they hacked it, they closed the Drupal vulnerability that they used to hack it, so that nobody else could hack in behind them. Brian Kemp ran that election, the 2016 election, the 2018 election, where he ran against Stacey Abrams and got himself elected. He was Secretary of State. He was apparently, responsible for much of this cover-up. What the hell is going on in Georgia? Number one. Number two, you ever heard of a pyrocumulus cloud? Cumulus clouds are the thunderstorm clouds, the big thunderheads. Those are called cumulus or cumulonimbus clouds. But a pyrocumulus cloud is a cloud, they have internal winds of more than 100 miles an hour and insanely intense heat, 700-degree heat. And they're happening all over the place, all around the world now. We never saw these things even 5 years ago. This one researcher says, they're supposed to be as common as hobby horse poo. In other words, they're just not even supposed to exist. And they're happening all over the place. More than 30 of these pyrocumulus events have happened in Australia just in the last 3 months. David Bowen, professor of pyrogeography at the University of Tasmania, says this is a complete tipping point. Pyrocumulus events are meant to be as rare as rocking horse poo. Over the past 3 years, firestorms have developed in California, Russia, Portugal, and Canada. He says the models we've used are not working on these new types of fires. They don't even know how to model the weather that is being caused by these massive fires that are the result of global warming. He said if you look at all the big fires in the world since 2016, there is a trend. It's an evolution of fire intensity. More than 10 million hectares have already been burned in Australia. And finally, the banks are reporting their earnings. Their stocks are all going up because they all made billions because of Trump's tax cut. $32 billion in tax breaks went to the big banks, and instead of using this money to increase lending, this is from Bloomberg, now topping $32 billion as the lenders curbed new borrowing, pared jobs, and ramped up payouts to shareholders. In other words, they lay people off, they don't loan you any more money, and they pass out the money to themselves, to the banksters. Insane. Anyhow, Anything Goes Friday. I'll pick up your calls, starting with Diane in Waco right after the break. Stick around. It's coming up on 28 minutes here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Reminder at the top of the next hour, Congressman Ro Khanna, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, will be taking your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's your media support group for We the People, and it's Anything Goes Friday. Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B. And it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for the hidden history of voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. It's Anything Goes, Friday, 35 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Diane in Waco, Texas. Hey, Diane, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me good this time?
Yeah, it sounds great. Thank you, Diane.
Okay. I have a question. Okay. Remember back when the Ukraine scandal first came out that the whistleblower went to the IG and the IG went to, what's his name? William Barr.
Yeah.
Okay. William Barr did nothing. He dismissed it. Okay. But then on yesterday, right before the impeachment thing happened, what's going on, the OAG, I think it was, came out and announced that what Donald Trump administration did, what the White House did, rather, was against the law.
Right, that was the GAO, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Government Accountability Office.
By Barr dismissing that whistleblower complaint, and that's ignoring it, can he be held accountable for that?
Well, in a good world, can Bill Barr be held accountable? The problem is that the person who would hold Bill Barr accountable would be the Attorney General, and he is the Attorney General. I mean, he's the chief law enforcement officer in the country. You can't go above him other than the president himself, and he's unlikely to hold Bill Barr accountable for anything either. So yeah. I think this is, it's like with corrupt cops, when they get away with it, or corrupt judges, they get away with it until, a subsequent administration comes along and looks back at what happened. And I don't even think that that's likely. But Lev Parnas last night on Rachel's show, she said, why are you doing this and who are you most afraid of? And he said he was most afraid of Bill Barr. Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, that's what he said. And William Barr seemed like he's just getting so corrupt, being corrupt. But anyway, that was just all I wanted to ask you, and I thank you for your information. Okay, thank you, Diane. Great talking with you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Jerry in Santa Cruz. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. In order to actually remove Trump via this impeachment trial, it seems to me that evidence needs to be admitted in the form of a testimony and documents, and that in order to do that, a handful of Republican senators need to vote in favor of it. My question is, do the respective states of the Union have the power to impeach their respective senators now that they've taken the oath, the special oath, to be faithful as jurors? And if they violate the oath by, for instance, saying that there won't be any evidence admitted?
Right. I'm not sure the answer to that question. I would guess that it would depend on the individual state constitutions, and if they provided any, if they had any provision in their state constitutions. The thing that makes me think it's not possible is that these are federal offices. These people are elected to federal office. So if they were to be impeached, they would have to be impeached by the U.S. House and the Senate, I believe. I might be wrong on that, but none of them are going to get impeached for not doing their job. Well, the worst that will happen to them, and frankly, it's something that should happen to them, is that they won't get reelected.
I wonder what the congressman would have to say about that, and how to make the senators critically aware that they have a threat of impeachment from their states.
Yeah, I don't know. Perhaps somebody will ask him. Jerry, thanks for the call. Robert in Tyler, Texas. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I want to thank you for all that you and free speech do for us mortals out here.
Thank you.
But I wanted to ask you about something you brought up a long time ago about how Trump's employment numbers, he reduced the number of hours that they work so he could claim all of this. And you've never mentioned it again. I think that's something people ought to keep.
I don't have that. I don't have that information handy. I recall something about that, but I'm not sure if they've. You're talking about U1, U2, U3, U4. It's 1 through 7, as I recall. There's 7 different ways that unemployment is measured, or several different ways anyway that unemployment is measured. Some include discouraged workers. Some include people who have been out of the market for more than 6 months. Others don't. I mean, these different ways. And I don't recall if the Trump administration is.
The part about he lowered the number of hours that people worked to where he could claim that they were employed.
Yeah, I don't specifically recall that, Robert. I do recall attempts at making changes for when people become eligible for certain benefits or certain mandated benefits. And even that, my recollection was in debate. But perhaps somebody can correct me. If somebody knows, give us a shout. I can't say right off the top of my head. I'm very sorry. Robert, thanks for the call. Kayleen in Laguna Woods, California. Hey, Kayleen, what's up?
Hi there.
Hi.
Let's see. I wanted to revisit what you mentioned yesterday about nuclear power.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to reiterate that calling nuclear power green is, I don't want to use the word hoax, because that
crazy.
actually means joke. It's
right.
It's a big deception.
Yes.
And particularly with the nuclear waste, which a caller called in on yesterday,
mm-hmm.
What we've learned at San Onofre is the company Holtec is working across the country to buy up the decommissioning of the plants and taking the waste. But the canister and containment of the nuclear waste is the most serious consideration. And the canisters that this waste is being stored in are 3/4 of an inch wide. It's 3/4 of an inch stainless steel canisters that are welded shut.
Right.
They can't be inspected. They can't be repaired. They can't be replaced. There's no facility in the United States to handle canister fuel once it's welded shut.
Right, and the caller yesterday was pointing out that the canisters at Fukushima were substantially thicker than that, and that these canisters are a wreck waiting to happen apparently.
Yes, and there's 2 types of containers available globally. The other option are thick-walled casks that can be inspected, can be repaired, can be maintained. They're monitored. These are pressure vessels. And so basically the industry is running the NRC, and a company like Holtec is getting exemptions for all these regulations that are within the NRC safety guidelines, and they just have them in the pocket. Yeah. And they get exemption after exemption and then make an amendment to their design plan when they realize it doesn't work. These canisters at San Onofre are all being damaged with gouging of the stainless steel. So this is something that Congress needs to be aware of, because there's all these bills coming into Congress to amend the Nuclear Waste Policy Act and to, consider consolidated storage, or, the Yucca Mountain is a no deal. They're going to really realize that we have to safely contain the stuff where it is in these thick-walled casks.
Right, and for a million years. I mean, it's for longer than human beings have been on this planet. I get it, Kayleen, and it concerns me tremendously. And, in fact, maybe we can get the folks in Beyond Nuclear to come back on and talk specifically about this, because
I'd love that. If you could also, your listeners could look at San Onofre Safety, sanonofresafety.org. Okay. We have a petition calling for this. And there's some expertise in that organization that's really advocating for the canister, for the thick wall cask.
Great. Sean is making a note as we speak. Thank you, Kayleen. It's great to hear from you. Chris in Humphrey, Arkansas. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Hello. Yes, Josh Mahoney, Democratic candidate for senator for the state of Arkansas, has recused himself from the race, and now Tom Cotton is running unchallenged.
Really?
For senator, yeah. So he's a shoo-in now.
How did that happen?
No way we can, apparently, Josh Mahoney had to drop out of the race because he is some executive for a nonprofit legal aid society or organization of some kind. I didn't read the article thoroughly. I was so depressed and disgusted.
But he's dropped out of the race. That's really unfortunate. But and I guess it's too late for a Democrat to get back into the race, right? I mean, the primary's all done and everything. Yeah.
The filing period has closed.
Yeah, amazing. Chris, thanks a lot for the call and for the heads up about what's going on in Arkansas. Whew. It's 44 minutes past the hour. Sometimes you think this country is just absolutely falling apart, and other times you think, well, maybe this is like the stuff that's going to wake everybody up. Maybe these are the birth pains of a new America.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I'm inclined to hope for the latter and be concerned about the former. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. Nora in Sandy, Oregon. Hey, Nora, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Hey, thanks for everything you do.
My
Love
pleasure.
Your program. Thanks for taking my call. I was just, I was realizing, the senators have to go back for the impeachment hearings. So the senators that are actually running for office and campaigning currently our progressive presidential senator campaigners aren't actually going to be very available for campaigning.
Right, for the next couple weeks.
Is that something that people have thought about? That leaves Biden and Bloomberg out there running around on jets going everywhere.
Yeah, it's, specifically Senators Warren and Sanders, the leader. Michael Bennet will be stuck in D.C. too, but I don't think anybody's given him any kind of a chance. It's just, it is what it is, Nora. There's nothing that we can do about it. I mean, they're probably going to have to crank up their fundraising and their media buys, and their surrogates are going to be out in larger numbers. You got Julian Castro campaigning on behalf of Elizabeth Warren, and you've got Ro Khanna campaigning on behalf of Bernie Sanders, and they're probably going to be doing a lot more, individual presentations, and in fact they may even be bringing in. I'm sure they'll be bringing in additional surrogates, on top of that. So, we'll see what happens. Sure. Nora, good point. Thanks for calling and pointing it out. Good talking to you. Marcia in Winter Park, Florida. Hey, Marcia, what's on your mind?
Well, I had different subjects yesterday when we couldn't connect, but this is about an unforeseen piece of the student loan problem. And it was just something that I realized today. I tried to take a home equity line of credit out of my home, which is, I've owned it for 30 years, got lots of equity, and left to pay. And what comes up in the application is my debt to income ratio. So
as a result of your student loans?
Well, no, when they do a home equity line of credit, they have to do an income to debt ratio to decide if they're going to be able to give it to you.
Right. Or really if you can pay it off. I mean, that's their concern. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there's a percentage that it needs to be less than 40%. Well, I'm on Social Security. My student loan is ballooned. I have a income-based repayment plan. It was a Parent Plus loan through the Department of Education, handled by Navient, company that has all these lawsuits against it for bad handling, whatever.
Yep.
But the point is that loan has ballooned from $8,000, which is not a lot of money, to $14,000.
Whoa. Just adding interest because you've been making interest payments rather than principal payments?
Well, I have an income deferred plan for repayment, which requires me to pay nothing zero.
Right. So then they continue. So what they're doing is they're adding interest to your principal, basically.
Exactly right. It's capitalized.
Yeah.
So therefore, this is not something that every student would recognize.
And so it's making it hard for you to even borrow money against your house to pay off your student debt, presumably.
That's right. I have $300,000 equity in my house.
Yeah, that's a mess. Marcia, I'm sorry, we got to run, but excellent point. I mean, there shouldn't be any student debt in the United States. There isn't in most other developed countries. It just pretty much doesn't exist. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am well. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. All things considering. Tom, we do know that Trump is dangerous, and I'm just concerned about overall with the Republican Party. And I want to just defeat anybody who is a Republican, Tom, at this point. I don't want to take any chances. I'm talking about on the local level as well as the federal. But then also the fact that they made him, commander-in-chief of our military. I really just hated that, Tom, and feel
the Constitution
so badly
does
for the
that,
soldiers.
Pam.
Voting for Trump made him commander-in-chief.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's what I was
I get it.
But let me ask, Tom, I'm really concerned with the debates. I'm listening very intently, because I want to make sure I'm understanding policy from what's really coming from the candidates. And it discourages me because the pundits don't talk about really the details that they're providing. They rather focus on the surface things.
Correct.
However, with the progressives, if I could get your take on what's happening with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, because they are kind of appealing to the same base of voters. Mm-hmm. And I remember in that exchange, Bernie mentioned that he deferred to Sanders when before he decided to run initially.
Right. Yeah. 4 years ago, Bernie was on this program every single Friday. People were constantly, it was 5 years ago, people were constantly calling up and saying, Bernie, please run for president. And he kept saying no. And the reason he was saying no, and he said this in the debate, and I've kept quiet about this all these years, but I knew it from back then. The reason why he said no was because he was waiting for Elizabeth Warren to get in. He was hoping she would get in. And he wanted to see if somebody was going to take on Hillary Clinton, he thought, A, it would be better it was a woman, and B, she was close enough to his policy positions that he would fully support her, and C, he thought she had a really good chance of winning.
So now let me ask, was he hoping that she would defer to him in this election? And since that didn't occur, Tom, why is it that I guess Elizabeth Warren decided to run? And I'm not trying to pit either one against each other.
No, I get it. But your point that they're both taking the same base is one that their campaigns are having to confront now. And, they're going to have to figure out how to differentiate themselves from each other. And it's going to have to be something other than whether or not Bernie thinks that a woman can't win, because nobody's believing that. And it's real unfortunate that, that became the issue over which they're fighting. But, I mean, you add together, they're both polling, in the neighborhood of 15 to 20%. Joe Biden is polling in the neighborhood of 20 to 30%. So if you take Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and add them together, they're if either one of them were to drop out of the race or to lose, in several primaries, the remaining person would have a larger percentage of the vote than Joe Biden, or even arguably Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg together, depending on the day. And so, I don't have any easy answer for this, and I'm glad I'm not advising either team, because this is a real tough one. These are both wonderful candidates, and
the policies, Tom. When I'm listening to the policies that they're trying to put forth,
it's what we
that
need.
Impresses me.
Yeah,
and
it's
lastly,
absolutely what we need. Go ahead.
when Klobuchar says in the debate where, and she said this before, where, we can't offer up pipe dreams and things that aren't going to happen. I really want the Democratic voters to really ignore that, because these things aren't pipe dreams. The ideas and visions that are coming from Sanders and Warren, they're real, they're reality, and they're offering something different, because they're going to have to come in behind Trump and do something drastic to reverse a lot of the policies he has put in place.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. I mean, the next president, is really. Thank you, Pam. Has really got a. They're going to have to go into the White House with a shovel. I mean, it's just that bad. Todd in Santa Ana, California. Hey, Todd, what's up?
Yes, I have a question. If Trump withholding aid to Ukraine is illegal, and Parnas worked with Giuliani in any capacity on it, why don't the Southern District file criminal charges against Giuliani?
Because that would have to come out of Bill Barr's office, and he's not going to do it. He's, as William Safire used to call him, cover-up General Barr. He covered up the Iran-Contra investigation. He shut it down and covered up the whole crime, on behalf of George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan, and now he's doing it on behalf of Trump. This guy he's a Republican hitman. He comes in and he covers up for Republican criminals. That's what's going on. Todd, thanks for the call. Good question. Jenny in Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, Jenny, what's up?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I'm calling because I'm a former resident of New York. I've lived here in Miami about 8 years now. And in 2016, I still have family in New York. My dad was kicked off of the voter rolls in New York City. He lives in Queens. I know there was this big emphasis on people being kicked off of the voter rolls in areas like Brooklyn, for example. Mm-hmm. But the truth is that people were kicked off of the voter rolls in all areas, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, all of these very big, densely populated areas. So my dad, from 2016, he still hasn't been reinstated. He's an elderly voter. I called, got everything sent to his house. However, what I find really interesting is that, one, people have to re-register themselves in New York because they're not going to be automatically re-registered. And I lived in New York 8 years ago. I moved. I voted here several times. I haven't voted in New York. And I'm still registered. When I lived in New York, I lived in a more affluent area of Queens. And I've checked my registration through the years, and I find it hilarious that supposedly they do these voter purges, and they send you a letter to your house to check if you still live there. And if you don't live there or don't answer it, they automatically kick you off. But that's not true all around. They only did that in certain areas, because the area where I lived in Whitestone, which was a predominantly more affluent area, there are people who still haven't been kicked off that no longer live there. And I'm a prime
This is one of the reasons why I wrote the Hidden History on the War on Voting. I mean, we need a constitutional amendment to say that there is an explicit right to vote. And if we had because we don't have a right to vote. I mean, in the Bush v. Gore decision, Chief Justice Rehnquist literally said there is no right to vote for President of the United States in the Constitution. That's verbatim from that decision. And there needs to be a right to vote, because if there was a right to vote, they couldn't mess with your vote like this. They would have to jump through 16 different hoops before they purged you. And instead, Republicans in particular, in some places, some Democrats, I suppose, but this is core to the Republican campaign strategy, is kicking people off the voting rolls. So Jenny, thanks for sharing your story. It sensitizes people to what's going on. Up next, Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Fight back!
Book on the Thom Hartmann Book Report today, or Book Club today, is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question: what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Vilma Espin. In Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, healthcare, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future by Vilma Espin. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters Series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna is on the line with us, taking your calls for the hour. Congressman Khanna is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro, R-O, Khanna. Congressman, welcome back.
Great to be back on, Tom.
And thanks so much for being here with us in this kind of national town hall meeting. I'm just, before we pick up the calls, I'm just curious what's on the top of your mind right now. What do you think are the most consequential things going on? Oh, and I do have a question for you, a specific question. Last night, Lev Parnas, in his interview with Rachel Maddow, said that he was telling the story about how Trump tried to fire Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch 4 or 5 times, once in front of Parnas himself. And each time Trump's people refused to do it because they knew it was just like a bad idea, it's stupid and whatever. And Parnas said the thing that they were afraid of was that he would do it by tweet. And that suddenly caused, the penny dropped for me when he said that. It was like, because remember when he tweeted that we were pulling out of Syria and the Pentagon was like, we didn't know this, and the State Department was like, we didn't know this. I think that probably every time Trump has tweeted a policy thing, firing Rex Tillerson was another one. Every time he has tweeted a policy statement, it's because he's tried to get it past the adults in the room, and they've said, no, Donnie, you can't do that. It would be stupid. It would harm America's national security. It would be destructive. And so he goes ahead and does it on Twitter anyway. And if that's the case, then that's a story, in my opinion, if that's the case. I'm curious your thoughts on that, and also,
Tom, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think we've seen this time and again on his foreign policy initiatives. In particular, he has pushback. He doesn't know how to navigate that pushback, and so he does something on Twitter, basically declaring policy. And there are 2 problems with it. Sometimes, even if his instinct is better than his advisors, which is let's withdraw, by doing it over Twitter, there's no responsible plan. There's no effective strategy, and it's sort of the implementation is horrible. And other times where he's got horrendous instincts, he's bypassing all the checks. And the point you make is a really good one, because it's not just that this president has bypassed the checks of two chambers of Congress, of the checks and balances of the congressional branch. We also, because we're the most powerful country in the world and don't want power concentrated in one individual, have a lot of checks on the president within the executive branch. And this president has totally subverted any of the checks that most other presidents believe in within the executive branch.
Yeah, it's spooky stuff. It's spooky stuff. So you want to pick up phone calls? Or is there
That'd
anything
be great.
Okay, let's go for it. Chris in Oklahoma City. Hey, Chris, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman Ro Khanna. I was wondering, with the media companies able to monetize Trump's controversial presidency, and how that leaves Americans perhaps a little skeptical of media's position vis-a-vis re-election, would there be some sort of appetite for setting a price ceiling for advertising rates for opinion-based programming? So MSNBC, or for that matter, the show I'm calling right now, can't charge 500% more during the Trump administration than it could during a theoretical Biden administration for a 30-second ad slot.
Well, Chris, my understanding is that there are regulations for candidate ads where you have to provide the candidate with the cheapest rate possible. But I'd be open to looking at regulation on advertising to make sure that you can't discriminate based on administration that's in power, or to make sure that it's fair. I mean, we did have the fairness doctrine, which I would bring back, which would have gotten to all these matters. But I do think it's a worthwhile point that people should have the ability to advertise at the cheapest dollar and not be discriminated based on their viewpoint.
What about just banning political advertising and then requiring, as a condition of maintaining their licenses, requiring media companies, radio and television stations, to carry a certain number of ads free on behalf of candidates, serious candidates for office, or something like that? We sort of used to do that.
I'm open to the point of having them required to give a certain amount of airtime for free to candidates. I'm not for banning these ads either on social media or radio or television, just because I think that the First Amendment, I mean, if you're opposed to the war in Iran, or if you were opposed to the war in Iraq, or if you want to be doing things on climate change, I think we should be able to reach people in as many ways to advocate. But I do think there should be some threshold that media companies give to every serious candidate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Joe in Cupertino, California, you're on the air with your congressman.
Thank you so much, Tom, for allowing me to take the call again. I wanted to give a shout out to the legal women voters in the 19th Amendment, because it's a 100-year anniversary, and you talked about, how that we could change the Constitution. I think it's in there, maybe the last sentence different. Congressman, I'm really proud to suggest that maybe we should call Mark Pocan and make a gentleman's bet. We've got the 49ers here in your county, in your district. We're playing this Sunday. Maybe it's a cheesehead for, I don't know, what you think would be fair. But my question was asked earlier of Tom, was that AOC has said she doesn't want to pay the $250 to the Triple D because she doesn't think that they allow for inclusion.
There's the DCCC.
Yeah, the DCCC. I wonder if you had anything to think about or anything to say about that, because I really think that's going in the right direction. I mean, Bernie's not a corporate Democrat. And I think that that's what we're trying to promote, is progressive policies together. So, here in California, it's different maybe than it is on the East Coast, but progressives are the wave of the future. I'll take my answer off the air, but thank you again, and think about the game.
Well, Joe, I appreciate it. I think very positively of Mark Pocan these days, despite the 49ers Packers upcoming game, and that's because Mark just recently endorsed Bernie Sanders, and I think is going to be a huge asset to Bernie Sanders. Mark was telling me on the floor of the House that Bernie Sanders carried 71 out of 72 counties in Wisconsin, and so he's going to be going into Iowa and making the case why Bernie Sanders is the most electable and flipping Wisconsin. On the DCCC, I also actually share Mark Pocan's view. We both paid our dues. We both very vehemently disagree with the DCCC's policy on blacklisting consultants, and we're pushing to change it. But we view the dues as sort of like union dues. I mean, these are dues that go to a party that helps elect Democrats and help build the majority. You can vehemently disagree on policy, but I do think it's important still to support the party. But I respect very much Representative Ocasio-Cortez, and she's doing an incredible amount of work to help candidates individually, so she's doing her part in her own way.
Lou in Fairplay, Colorado. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes. First, I want to thank Congressman for his office has helped with a friend who was falsely arrested and deported. And so thank you for that. And I wanted to suggest that we, as in the Democratic Party, is there any reason we couldn't go to ranked choice primaries so that we can have Elizabeth and Bernie in the same contest without worrying about it?
Oh, that's a good question.
Lou, it's a great question. I mean, I've supported ranked choice voting. It has worked in places we've done it in California. I think it allows for more progressives to emerge. It allows for more women and minorities to emerge. It would be great to consider doing a form of ranked choice voting in the presidential election. It would require the DNC to implement that reform, but I certainly think it's a good idea.
Ronald in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good afternoon. How are you, Tom?
Good.
And good afternoon to you too, Congressman.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And my comment is kind of twofold. I listen to Tom all the time, and I listen to you when you come on, and I love what you do, love the job and how you are, sir. My problem is the mental state of the president. Tom was describing earlier how he rants and raves and goes through all these things, and in front of his journals he calls them idiots. And it just disturbs me as a citizen of this country how this man could be in charge of 330 million people and carrying on conduct like this. Is there anything that can be done, or do you guys do anything, or does anybody say anything about this?
Well, I share your concerns. I mean, it's a level of lying and erraticism that is completely unprecedented. I mean, the president goes out there and says that there was an imminent attack on 4 of our embassies. And then literally the next day, the Secretary of Defense says, no, I never saw any intelligence suggesting that. So it's not just that he's contradicting his own party or his contradicting the Congress. He's actually contradicting senior people who work for him and are carrying out his orders. This is why, in part, given the abuse of his office and given how he has subverted the rule of law, that he's being impeached. But short of removing him from office, I don't know what more the House can do. And we've done our part, and now it's up to the Senate to convict him.
Yeah, and make sure that everybody we know is registered to vote in the event that Mitch McConnell has his way, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There you go. Do it at the ballot box if we can't do it in the Senate. It's 16 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour right here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for the Congressman in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Ro Khanna is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents 17th District of California. Khanna.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. And welcome back. Scott in Hudson, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. Excuse me.
Hi, Congressman. I have a quick question for you. With religion infusing itself so much into the political process, when is someone going to create a bill to start making churches pay their fair share of property taxes? Because if they want to start injecting on how policy should be in the country, then they should do like every other taxpayer and pay their fair share of the bill. What do you think of that?
Well, Scott, I'm not for removing the tax exempt status of churches. What I am for is making sure that we have a strict separation of church and state when it comes to policies in our schools, when it comes to health care, when it comes to other agencies. But I think that faith plays an important role in the country as long as it's pluralistic, as long as we understand that in America we have people of all different backgrounds, and that also includes people who may be spiritual or people who may be atheists, and we need to have a respect for all of those beliefs.
Chris in Stowe, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thanks, Tom. Congressman Khanna, I saw something so upsetting on C-SPAN this morning. I've seen you on the Washington Journal program, and so I know you know what they do. They have a guest on, and they talk about, their issue, and then they take calls. But this morning, the woman who came on was a woman called Lauren Leader, and she's from a group called All In Together that promotes women in politics. And I was hoping that you could get someone from the campaign, from Bernie's campaign, to take a look at that 9 o'clock hour on C-SPAN from today, because it was really upsetting how they presented the issue over the debate. They did not show the question that the moderator had asked Bernie. All they showed was the question that was asked to Elizabeth Warren. And they made it look like Bernie actually did insult and lie about Elizabeth Warren. And I was so upset. If somebody could look at that hour and then try to get C-SPAN to have someone come in and represent the truth.
Right. So let's let Congressman Khanna respond, Chris. You already said that. Thank you.
Well, Chris, thanks for bringing it to our attention. I believe that the facts are pretty obvious. Senator Sanders has enormous respect for Senator Warren. He always has. Every time I've spoken to him, he's spoken about her in terms of her respect for her beliefs and the type of campaign she's running. I mean, he believes she's built a formidable coalition that absolutely could beat Donald Trump. So I agree with Senator Sanders and many of the progressive groups that we need to move on. Our focus needs to be electing a progressive nominee, and we shouldn't let the media continue to put out this story that is there to undermine the senator.
Yeah, and also to jack up the ratings for CNN, in my opinion. But who knows? Anyhow, Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour right here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Khanna.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and represents the 17th District of California. It's 21 minutes past the hour. My new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series. On Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle. Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis. Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History for the hour. Anthony in Philadelphia, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Anthony.
I have to say, it's an honor to be able to speak to you. I called to speak to Tom and had no idea I would be speaking to one of the progressive heroes today.
You're very kind.
What I wanted to bring up was what I've learned about trying to have political discourse in America. And I think that some of this will apply to the Democratic strategy. I find that when I'm talking to leftists or Democrats, they respond very well to fact-based arguments, to me listing statistics and things of that nature. when I'm speaking to more right-leaning Americans, they don't. They tend to respond to foundational issues, and I find that I have to raise their consciousness in 3 particular areas before they're even open to factual information and statistical analysis. And real quick, I don't want to take up too much time, but I find that there are 3 questions I have to ask them. One is, what is a society? 2, it's what is human nature? And 3, it's where does our technology come to us from? And what I find is the first thing that I have to do is orient them on what a society is. And in my view, it's a group of people coming together to increase quality of life through collective labor efforts. And that means that at the base form, a society is inherently socialist and centered around principles of cooperation.
Right. Anthony, forgive my interruption, but I need to move this along. Can you ask Congressman Khanna a question?
What I wanted to say was, do you think it would be more beneficial to challenge, because I see our challenge as a challenge against greed and corruption. And I feel like in order to get Americans to really accept it, what they need to do is have their views about society reoriented, stop subscribing all of our technological progress to competition, and start subscribing that to innovation through the mere existence of a problem. And stop assuming that people who are behaving differently than you, it's about their human nature, and start tying that directly to people responding to the systems that govern their daily lives.
Well, Anthony, I appreciate it. I think it's very thoughtful for you to say that progressives need to answer the big questions about what is good for our nation, what is the common good, what is it going to move humanity forward, and then fill in the details about a plan and how that plan works. But first you have to get people on the big sense of their values. And once they agree that you share those values, then they may listen to the concrete specifics. And so I think that that's an effective way of communicating.
Ryan in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. We have just a little more than a minute to the break. Ryan, if you could ask a real quick question for Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman, it's a pleasure to speak with you today. I was wondering if you would give us your thoughts on Kyle Jarrett, who's a field organizer for the Bernie Sanders campaign.
This is welcome to a troll call. You guys, it's too late to dump that, but anyhow. I'm out. We're going to be out of time here in 40 seconds. Congressman, what are your thoughts on where this impeachment is going to end up? Do you expect that Trump is actually going to be removed?
No. I mean, here's my hope. My hope is that 4 senators would vote at least to hear evidence, but I'm skeptical we're even going to get that level of independence. I think you're going to have a few weeks of a trial. Ultimately, McConnell is going to have the votes and whip almost every Republican to stand with him. And we're going to leave in a more divided way with Congress's power more diminished. A president who's ridden roughshod over the rule of law.
Yeah, it seems. We've got a couple senators who are retiring, but Roberts and Alexander. But anyhow, Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a second. It's 27 minutes past the hour. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep Ro Khanna, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until at last we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits in that secret a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Health care is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate healthcare has convinced us that some people deserve healthcare and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of health care. I believe this health care is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18, and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. And Vicki in Woodinville, Washington, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman, I want to thank you for your integrity and conviction and commitment to serving the citizens. So we
thank you, Vicki.
Appreciate you. My question is regarding what Bernie has been doing and what I think and your opinion about what I think might be a good idea, which is we're very familiar with all of Bernie's policies that he's proposing. I don't think they need to be continued to be repeated. I think what we need to do is start looking at the years of Trump's record to confront. And specifically, like an example would be all the diplomats that he has not replaced, and therefore we don't have that arm of being able to work internationally diplomatically with these people. So we have that lever to be able to interact with our alliances and our other people in other countries. So I don't understand why we don't confront the issues around Trump's record, especially when, like, the news is talking about what's going on between Elizabeth and Bernie and who's what, and they're looking for conflict. Well, there's a lot of conflict that we need to aim at the opponent, Trump. So what is your opinion?
Well, Vicki, I completely agree with you. I mean, we need to talk about this Trump's reckless actions that may get us into another war in the Middle East and how Senator Sanders would prevent that. But your point is a very good one about his total gutting of the State Department and of career foreign officers. And let me tell you why this matters. There was a question at the debate that CNN asked about, well, what would you do to prevent ISIS from reemerging if we pull our troops out of Iraq? Well, one answer should be that in Mosul, which no longer has an ISIS presence, why isn't the United States with USA not working on some form of reconstruction, of giving hospitals and roads and bridges? The only thing that's happening is UAE is giving $50 million for the construction of a mosque. And Trump has no strategy, no vision, because he doesn't have the apparatus in place on the type of diplomacy or work that would actually make America more safe and prevent the rise of terrorism. And there's going to be, that whole approach needs to be challenged.
David in Buffalo, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. Hi, Tom. I noticed yesterday when they had the swearing-in ceremony that the Chief Justice had his hand on the Bible when he swore in, but yet the senators did not use the Bible at all. And I just wondered, why was that?
Well, David, I don't know. When I was sworn in, I swore in putting my hand on the Constitution. I think different people get to swear in on different texts that mean something for them. Some of them swear in on the Bible. Some can be on a different religious text. Others, the Constitution. And technically, you don't even have to swear in on a book. It's not required.
Yeah, and he was doing all 100 of them at one time, so I think that's probably why. Ray in Astoria, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. Thanks for taking my call and speaking to me. Quick background, 80 years old, vet, Democrat all my life. I'm really disturbed about what's going on with the DLC and the DCCC. We all know that they sunk Bernie in 16, et cetera, et cetera. How can we take back the Democratic Party, all of it, for the progressive wing of the party and get rid of these, I call them blue dogs? May I have your answer, please?
All right. Thank you for calling. Thank you for your service to the country. I believe the way we get the progressive wing to be ascendant is to have a progressive nominee for president and a progressive president. Once you have a progressive president, that president would get to appoint the DNC head. That president would get to appoint a lot of the party officials. The president would have a big say in the structuring of the party. But to get there, we need a grassroots movement. And this grassroots movement is slowly taking over the party. Let me tell you, in California, prior to 2016, the party was not very sympathetic to Bernie Sanders. After 2016, all the Bernie delegates won in their races, and today the majority, or it's certainly the plurality of the California Democratic Party, has Bernie Sanders folks as delegates. So I think slowly we can take back the party.
Steve in Zimmerman, Minnesota. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good afternoon, Tom and Congressman Ro Khanna. I'm wondering, how is it that Kevin McCarthy can stand up in front of the microphones and call into question the integrity of Lev Parnas when he had no problem taking money from Lev Parnas? And I'm wondering, is there any way we can check to see all these other Republican representatives and where they're being influenced by outside money?
Dave, that's a good point. We should definitely look at where the funding is coming from. I will say this, Kevin McCarthy was on the floor making all of these excuses for Trump, and then Pelosi got up afterwards, and she was very appropriately tough because Doug Collins had spoken right before Kevin McCarthy, and Doug Collins, of course, had said that all Democrats love terrorists. And so Pelosi started her remarks saying, well, we accept your apology. But the reality is that the shameless rhetoric in some of these cases, it's even topped what the Republicans did during the Obama years. I mean, it's just, some of it is just awful.
Jerry in Gaylord, Michigan. Hey, Jerry, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, hi. Very happy to be on the air with you and the Congressman. I have a very short, simple question. What does he think of raising minimum wage? We have raised it so many times, and all it has done is raise prices.
Well, Jerry, we haven't actually raised it so many times, and the minimum wage is still stuck at $7.25. Now, in some certain places in California, we have it at $15. But I don't think it's too much to ask in a country where you have trillion-dollar companies, where you have people making millions and billions of dollars, that the workers should have some benefit from a globalization and the technology revolution. I mean, Google, Apple, these companies can afford, Amazon can afford to pay $15, and we can have a society that affords to pay workers a wage where they can have housing and health care and education. So I fully support an increased minimum wage.
Leslie in Central Square, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Con. How you doing?
You're on the air with Congressman Khanna, Leslie. Go for it.
Hey, I'd like to say that I think the next president, if he's Bernie or somebody, should start using executive orders immediately. One would be no lobbying for right away, okay, in Congress. No lobbying at all. 4 years, no matter what, if he take it back, there's a lot of good going to be done. And if he gets 8 years, a lot more will be getting done.
So no more ability to leave Congress and get $1 million a year job as a lobbyist. What do you think, Congressman?
Leslie, I completely agree with that. I mean, I don't think that people should cash out on their public service. Harry Truman, when he left office, there's a famous anecdote that he had to ask someone to pay the train ride to go give a speech because he didn't have enough money to afford the train ride. I mean, it used to be you didn't do these jobs to go get rich, and a ban on a lifetime ban, in my view. If you've served in Congress, you should never be able to become a lobbyist.
Mick in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Gong hoi fat choy, gentlemen. Thank you, Tom, especially for often mentioning my following question, which is, can you tell me, Congressman, what is the status of the children incarcerated at the border? And are the troops still there to manage the border along with the border guards? And why did $1.7 billion get spent on a wall when this crime is continuing?
They're all very deep questions, and it's outrageous what has happened. First of all the kids who were separated from their parents, all of them still have not been returned. Second, while there have been improvements in the conditions from the absolute worst, there's still a point where families are being sent back in a return to Mexico policy, even though they would qualify for asylum, and where kids are being detained in these conditions that are not up to American standards. And you're absolutely right. The president misallocated resources from the Pentagon budget to build his wall that I believe was unconstitutional. So we need to challenge these things in court, but ultimately the House has impeached him. I mean, we have to either beat him in an election or remove him from office.
Congressman Ro Khanna is taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. He represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. Khanna.house.gov, KHANNA.house.gov is the website. And you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your questions for Ro Khanna in just a moment. And welcome back. Jeff in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good day, Tom and Congressman Khanna. Thank you for the town hall. Congressman Khanna, although we have a self-serving grifter who wants to be king in the White House, I do feel we're getting close to the scene in The Wizard of Oz when the curtain falls down and we'll see, just like the wizard, that this wannabe emperor has no clothes. And I think by Bernie being part of the impeachment trial, he can use that as a platform to draw a contrast between himself and what a fraud Trump is. And the more Bernie talks about putting people to work in good-paying union jobs and keeping money in people's wallet with Medicare for all, the better. But the one other issue that Bernie could uniquely serve the country and his campaign by taking on, in my opinion, Congressman, is getting the GOP elephant out of our ballot box. And that would mean calling for a 2020 election without electronic voting machines. Congressman Khanna, is this something that is even in the realm of possibilities in the Bernie campaign?
Well, Jeff, I appreciate your pointing out what Bernie is for, which is letting people keep more of their money so that it isn't going to premiums, having strong unions and good-paying jobs. That's the essence of Senator Sanders' message. And he is for paper ballots. I mean, the House has passed the bill. The first H.R. 1 called for paper ballots verification in every precinct in this country. I mean, you could have electronic machines, but you had to keep a paper ballot so that any vote could be verified. And that has been caught up in the Senate. McConnell hasn't allowed it for a vote. Senator Sanders certainly supports paper ballots.
Susan in Albuquerque, New Mexico, watching Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you both for providing all the information and education. I have a question that since Trump has been impeached for withholding funds from the Ukraine, can it be added to his charges, the money that he has withheld from Puerto Rico has been allocated for disaster relief?
So I completely oppose the president's decision. I think it's morally outrageous for this president to not be helping Puerto Ricans with the earthquake and not having helped sufficiently with the past hurricanes. I do think it's different, though, as callous, as morally suspect that decision is. It's not as blatant a violation of the Constitution as in Ukraine, where he withheld the aid for his own political benefit, to benefit his own campaign. And so the charge of impeachment was not just for the president's callousness, but it was for his actual breaking of the law.
Yeah. Is there, we have 40 seconds to the break. It's not enough to take a call. Do you have any thoughts on how we might deal with this? I mean, it seems to me like, Trump is withholding, I believe, billions of dollars from Puerto Rico. And in my opinion, he's doing this out of pure racism.
Well, I mean, we had people speak up in the caucus, one of them almost in tears, talking about people dying. They're American citizens, and we're not releasing the aid. And we need to pass, I think the House should immediately pass something directing the president to do it, and the Senate should do that, and then to flex our power and to say, look, we're not going to fund other priorities until you release this aid.
Yeah, I'm with you. Congressman Khanna is taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna in just a moment. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. And you can tweet him at rep, as in representative, R-E-P, rep, Ro, R-O, Khanna, K-H-A-N-N-A. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Congressman Khanna, taking your calls for the hour. David in Columbus, Ohio, you're on the air with Ro Khanna.
Hello?
Hey, you're on the air, David.
Hi. Congressman, I support progressives, and I would like to find a nice list of all the progressives, what they stand for, that sort of thing, so I can donate to them. And I do this because I don't want to keep donating to corporate people that turn around and just don't do what they say they're going to do.
So is your question, is there a website for the Congressional Progressive Caucus?
Right, that's my question.
Okay, great. Thank you, David.
Well, David, obviously I can't talk about anything explicitly related to fundraising on this call since I'm in the Capitol, but what I can say is that there are many different places that can give you a sense of a person's record. Progressive Punch or the Progressive Caucus can certainly let you know where a person stands on the issue.
And I think I can add that if he just plugs Congressional Progressive Caucus into a search engine, it'll come up with the website for it. Hi, in Houston, Texas. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Congressman Khanna. I got a question. Just out of curiosity here, but all of your years in Congress so far, are there any vibrations among members to think about possibly down the road amending the Constitution to allow naturalized born citizens to run for president? It's just that I have friends who are born in different parts of the world and they're naturalized American, and just like Americans like ourselves, and who have good ideas about improving our country. And it just so sad. I say to myself that they will never be able to run for president because of this antiquated law.
Well, I agree with you that we should allow naturalized citizens to run for president. I think the closest this country in recent times came to it was when people wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger to run, who was the governor of California, and even Republicans back then wanted him to run. But then, his poll numbers tanked and there wasn't as much of a movement. But my sense is it will take a charismatic individual, perhaps someone even, unfortunately, on the right, to get people to agree to amending that. But I agree with you. It's an antiquated law, and a naturalized citizen should be able to run.
Charles in Miami, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, gentlemen. How you doing? I love your show on Friday.
Thank you.
My question is this, Congressman Khanna. It seems as if Bloomberg, who I would never vote for, got in the race only because he wanted to fight Elizabeth Warren and make sure that she didn't win. Steyer, to me, he got in because, he's got the money to do so. And what I'm trying to say is this. After all of this, with one billionaire that's already in the office, and we know how terrible these people can be with money, when money is concerned, why were they allowed to get in the race? Because they didn't go through the process of Elizabeth or everybody else that was on, that's on stage now that got polled, that asked for money. I don't want to hear Bloomberg saying that he has money. He doesn't need money. I think that would also be a tell on the money that he did collect, because people already know that he's not a real. We wouldn't consider him a progressive or someone that's going to move the country in our way. How did we let this happen to this point where we have these billionaires in the race? It seemed like they took their money, they curtailed the regular process, and they're on stage right now. One of them is on stage. And I'm just offended by that because this was supposed to be a grassroots movement. It started.
Charles, let's get Congressman Khanna's response. We only have a couple minutes here till the end of the hour.
Well, Charles, I share your frustration. One simple fix would be that the DNC could say from the beginning that you don't get on the debates or participate in the DNC sanctioned events if you spend over $1 million or some threshold amount of your own money. To send a signal that people shouldn't be able to just get on the debate stage or become credible candidates by spending. I will say one thing to Bloomberg, and I hope he continues that way. So far, all of his spending in ads have been anti-Trump, and he has focused against Trump. And my hope is that if he continues that way and doesn't turn the fire internally, it may end up making it easier for who our eventual nominee is, and I do think a progressive will be the ultimate nominee.
Craig in Joliet, Illinois. We have just a minute to the end of the hour. Craig, a quick question for Congressman Khanna?
Yeah, I was wondering why the House signed on to this latest trade deal that the Republicans had proposed. It doesn't seem like a very good deal on the surface to begin with, and it seems like a huge political win going into an election year for the Republicans. I'd like to know why Pelosi and the House okayed this.
It was a difficult decision, obviously, that has had terrible environmental provisions. The Speaker's hope is that there'll be a new Democratic president who can add those environmental safeguards, but there were a lot of farmers and a lot of manufacturers who were hurting because they weren't being able to sell overseas, and that's, I think, why the Speaker took it up.
Congressman, in our final 20 seconds here, what do you see coming in the next week? What should we be keeping our eye on?
There are going to be more efforts, Tom, to make sure that we're restricting the president's ability to get us into war in Iran. There was just a report that apparently 11 troops were injured in the Iranian attack. The president wasn't transparent about this. We need to make sure that we don't escalate. And then there is going to be further efforts on infrastructure. The House is going to be taking that up. We're going to continue to do work, even as the Senate has impeachment.
Wonderful. Congressman Khanna, thanks so much for dropping by
today. Thank you.
Great
Appreciate
talking.
it.
Yep, my pleasure. Congressman Ro Khanna, khanna.house.gov is his website. And we'll be back with Anything Goes Friday right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Animal Kind, Remarkable Discoveries About Animals and Revolutionary Ways to Show Them Compassion by Ingrid Newkirk and Jean Stone. This is from the very first chapter. Researchers at Germany's Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology were dumbfounded. The excitement wasn't over a new fossil or the discovery of a previously unknown human ancestor. It was over Rico, a border collie. In experiments conducted in 2004, the very normal seeming 10-year-old canine had learned to fetch more than 200 objects on command, and moreover, remembered them all a month later. Determined to discover the limits of Rico's abilities, the research team subjected him to a battery of cognitive tests that revealed astounding problem-solving abilities. Rico could easily retrieve from another room items he was familiar with, but when told to retrieve a new item, one he had never heard before, Rico correctly deduced that the unknown name must correspond with an unknown object, and correctly retrieved it. The Border Collie's cognitive abilities were subsequently compared to that of apes, dolphins, parrots, and eventually human children. Researchers often end up comparing their animal subjects' intelligence to humans, but is intelligence truly easy to compare, animal to human, or even animal to animal? If Rico could use the process of elimination to correctly fetch a tennis ball, does that make him smarter than an Arctic tern who journeys 44,000 miles each year between the North and South Poles? Is a piano-playing cat more intelligent than a chimpanzee who shares 99% of her DNA with humans and can learn sign language? Comparing the intelligence of animals is, in fact, no easier than comparing the intelligence of humans. Who's smarter, Aristotle or Plato, Newton or Einstein, Monet or Manet, the red-lipped batfish or Chinese giant salamanders, the Indian elephant or the African elephant? In the end, ranking the relative intelligence of animals is a futile exercise. What's more, a recent study found that less than 15% of the estimated 9 million species on Earth have been discovered. Who knows what fantastical creatures reside at our ocean's crushing depths, soar high in the stratosphere, or creep deep in the densest jungles? What fantastic intelligence do they display? Or, more so, what fantastic intelligence we can't even comprehend? We often consider intelligence as the only factor in determining which animals deserve compassion and which don't. Yet we're still so limited in our understanding of human intelligence that it makes little sense to calibrate our animal brethren based on how similar their brains are to ours. Or perhaps you could say it's simply not an intelligent way to determine importance. The goal of this book is not to merely question that superiority or to show that animals think and act like us. It's to show how they do not and to honor those differences. How can anyone compare the mental faculties of a gibbon vaulting through the forest with a giant blue whale singing through the deepest oceans? Different animals excel at different actions. As we'll see in this book, animals think, navigate, communicate, love, and play in extraordinarily unique ways. However, for many years, scientists believed that intelligence was indeed all that mattered when it came to animals, and that intelligence consisted of a continuum with humans at the most developed end. Every other species could fit neatly into that spectrum, a concept heralded by the great naturalist Charles Darwin, who wrote in his 1871 book, The Descent of Man, that, quote, "the difference in mind between man and the higher animals, great as it is, certainly is one of degree and not of kind," end quote. In essence, Darwin meant that because all animals share a common ancestor, they also share the same toolkit of mental abilities, but at different levels. Not a new idea. 2,400 years ago, Aristotle presented his idea of natural ladder, or scala natura. Like Darwin, Aristotle advanced that all life could be conveniently ranked with lesser animals like worms on one end, intermediate animals like dogs and cats in the middle, and higher animals such as monkeys and humans at the far end. During the Middle Ages, Christian theologians expanded on Aristotle's teachings with the great chain of being, a hierarchical scale that began with God at the very top, followed by angels, humans, other animals, plants, and then minerals. Each layer of the chain also had its own hierarchy. Among humans, for instance, kings, aristocrats, and other noblemen were at the top, while peasants were relegated to the bottom. The highest-ranking animals were large carnivores like lions and tigers, who were untrainable and therefore seen as superior to docile animals like dogs and horses. Even insects were subdivided, with honey-producing bees ranked higher than mosquitoes and plant-eating beetles. Finally, at the very bottom sat snakes, their lowly station a result of the serpent's deception in the Garden of Eden. Even throughout the 20th century, scientists clung to the notion that animals can be neatly ranked by their human intelligence. Scientists devised increasingly cruel experiments that could serve as universal tests for animal cognition, many of them led by University of Wisconsin-Madison psychologist Harry Harlow. Previously, Harlow was best known for a series of experiments from the 1950s, in which he removed infant rhesus monkeys from their mothers and provided them surrogate mothers made from wire. The traumatized monkeys' desperate attempts to be caressed by their inanimate mothers during times of stress became the basis for research into maternal separation, dependency needs, and social isolations. Many historians cite Harlow as a factor in the rise of subsequent animal liberation movements. Later, Harlow developed experiments called learning sets, which effectively tested how well a subject could learn. For instance, an animal would be presented with two doors, one containing food. The test would be repeated until the animal learned the correct door. Much like Aristotle's Scala Naturae, it continues. Animal Kind is the book by Newkirk and Stone. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back, Thom Hartmann here. Somebody just fell on the floor. What was it? Oh, it's a copy of one of my books. We've got books falling coming out of the sky here. It's amazing. Anyhow, it's Anything Goes Friday, picking up your calls, whatever you'd like to talk about. You heard, if you tuned in, or if you were tuned in for the first hour, I was talking about how Jeffrey Epstein's former defense team, at least Mr. Dershowitz, and O.J. Simpson's and others, Mike Tyson, Roman Polanski, is now going, and Mr. Dershowitz also apparently a visitor to Mr. Epstein's island, or something like that, has been added to Trump's defense team. It's getting weird. It's getting real weird. But anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls. David in San Francisco. Hey, David, thanks for listening to AM 910. What's up?
I was interested. You're certainly familiar with the old expression "pump and dump." About pumping and dumping a stock.
Yep.
That the stock market swindlers use that. And, for listeners that have never heard it before, basically some con artists will latch onto a stock and they'll praise it and praise it and praise it, and then they'll create a whole bunch of interest and people will buy that stock and puff up the price. Well, the con artists, by that time, they sell it real quick. And then it falls to its natural level, and there are a bunch of people lose a lot of money. So when you start looking at Trump and his organized crime crew, he's got Wilbur Ross, who's putting together American statistics. He's Secretary of Commerce. And if the Trump economy is booming and whiz-bang, it's probably because of numbers that Wilbur Ross has put together. Steve Mnuchin over in Treasury, too. He's famous for cooking books. And so Wilbur Ross, of course, if you look in Wikipedia, he's listed as the king of bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. And he's famous for puffing up a situation enough so that he can swoop in like a vulture when it crashes.
Yeah, Forbes magazine called him a grifter.
Right. Yeah, and in, New York history, I've got an old book about the old building in New York City called the Dakota, where John Lennon lived. Mm-hmm. And Wilbur Ross was the treasurer of the Dakota. And even back in 1979, when that book was written, Wilbur Ross was looked at with disdain. He was considered a kind of a con artist from across town.
Yep.
And the idea that he's our commerce secretary, and we're allowing statistics of American reputation to be put to him.
Well,
So,
David, so is the essence of what you're saying here that you think that the low unemployment numbers and the high workforce participation numbers are purely cooked books? Because what I'm seeing is a couple of factors that actually could account for a 3.5% unemployment rate. Number one, you've got the workforce participation rate right now is about 3%, as I recall. I think it's around 63.5% right now, and it was like 67 or something like that 10 years ago. What I see is the boomer, the generation of baby boomers are aging out of the workforce, and that was a huge generation, particularly compared to the generation immediately behind it. And so that would contribute to less unemployment because there's more jobs available because people are leaving those, number one. Number two, you've got, I think, 17 states now that have raised, just in the last 2 or 3 years, that have raised the minimum wage. And in every single case, when you raise the minimum wage, that is the single most effective stimulus to an economy that can exist. And then number three, you've got the Federal Reserve, as a result of Jay Powell being constantly berated and harangued by Donald Trump, in part. You've got the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates artificially low and pouring trillions of dollars indirectly into the economy through the banks. But the low interest rates are causing people to put debt on their credit cards, to buy houses, to engage in a lot of behaviors, stocking up on debt principally, but broadly speaking, engage in a lot of behaviors that they wouldn't be doing if interest rates were at the traditional, 4, 5, 6%. And I think if you pull out those three structural supports, Trump's thing kind of falls apart. But I don't think that it's inexplicable.
Well, I'm not saying it's inexplicable. I mean, you gave three good categories where they could doctor the books. And so when you start looking at doctoring the books, like, for example, you mentioned the baby boom is retiring.
Right.
Well, hypothetically, the baby boom needs more medical assistance. So that's more jobs. What do they say?
Well, that was my point.
Every injured soldier, there's 8 nurses.
Yeah, that was my point. As people age out of the workforce, you're doubling down on my point. Number one, they leave the job, and you're right. That wouldn't increase unemployment.
You create jobs.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But are they low-paid home health care jobs? Here's the other factor. You gave 3. The fourth is hyperinflation. And, I've been mentioning this on some other shows. If you look at the baby boom, 1968, pretty much they got into the workforce, and the minimum wage kicks in February of 1968 at $1.60. Well, if you look at the price of gold right then, it was $32 an ounce. And so it would take you 22 hours to buy an ounce of gold at minimum wage. So if you took today's ounce of gold and divided it by 22, you'd get probably close to $70 an hour.
Yeah,
so
but you can't use gold, David, because Nixon took us off the gold standard in '72, and that
5 years later.
It was artificially low right then. But if you inflation adjust the minimum wage, it comes out to something like $18 or $20 an hour right now. I get it. Your point is you still don't trust the statistics. I've got to move along and we've got a bunch of callers stacked up here. I want to get them in, but your points are fascinating, and I would love to see any evidence that you might have that Wilbur Ross is cooking the books. If you can find any, please tweet it to me. Okay, David?
Will do.
Okay, thanks a lot.
I don't use tweets so often, but.
Well, maybe find a friend who does. It's the best way to talk to me, other than calling in. That's weird. So anyhow, David, thanks a lot for the call. Deborah in Denver, Colorado. You're on the air. What's up, Deborah?
Hi, Tom. I would like to comment on The View yesterday. I was watching it, and I just don't think that it's balanced in an objective show. For instance, not one person gave Bernie the benefit of the doubt. They were saying really nasty things about him. Anika on the morning show, she did. She gave him the benefit of the doubt, and I'm so impressed with her.
Yeah.
And on CNN, I really think that was staged. I think that they were trying to pin the two candidates against each other.
Of course.
They were trying to influence.
Of course, they hyped that for 2 days, CNN did. They were trying to jack up their ratings.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the reason why Meghan McCain hates Bernie so much is because his light shines, his inspiration shines and burns. He cares about his fellow man. He cares about the nation. His message is like infectious. He cares about the elderly, the poor, the sick, the rich, everybody. And his message burns so bright. I just want to say that Meghan's does not. She always plays the victim while she trashes everybody else. And
I don't watch the show, but
I wish they'd bring somebody more balanced on there.
Yeah, I don't watch the show, but I've been following on Huffington Post. They've been almost daily reporting on the Abby Huntsman, Meghan McCain riff and all this other stuff, and I don't know, like I said, I don't watch the show, but
I just have to say this because it's in my heart. It's really affected me. They need somebody balanced on there. Like, I used to watch it when Sherry was on there. I don't hardly watch it that much anymore because Meghan McCain is not John McCain.
Yeah.
Her message is very abrasive, darkness. She doesn't care. She just trashes whoever she wants. And she talks about being a straight shooter. She respects people for being a straight shooter. But if you're a straight shooter with her, she jumps off the show. She goes throwing a tantrum. She goes to her tweeter.
Yeah. No, I get it. And Deborah, I don't know what to do about that other than not watching the show. But thank you for your comment, Andrew in Oklahoma City. Hey, Andrew, what's up?
Hey, Tom. First of all, you're just brilliant. I love the excerpts you were from the book related to healthcare. That was just brilliant. But there's been so much today that I'm just like going, okay, where do I go with this? But when you were talking about the unemployment, I also wanted to remind everybody Bush is doing executive orders behind the scenes that are forcing a lot of people that are on government assistance off of it. Right. And even if they can't really work due to this situation or that situation, they're having to go out. They're either going to be on the street or starving.
Yeah, and it's not just Trump. You're also seeing this on a state-by-state basis in the Republican states, particularly with regard to Medicare, or Medicaid, rather.
Oh, 100%. I'm in Oklahoma.
Trump is doing it with food stamps.
Red meat.
Yeah.
Yeah, $1 billion in tax cuts for the richest of the state, and they took $1 billion out of education for it.
There you go.
But actually, what I really wanted you to comment on is I just kind of get this feeling. Now, we know that a fair amount of Congress, I'd say 99%, is kind of on the dole from the business class. And we also know both parties.
I don't think it's 99%. I think it's about probably 2/3 of the House and 90% of the Senate.
Well, okay, but I mean, the only way you could say that is if you know for a fact they're all people funded and not taking corporate money.
Well, I can say 90% of the Senate because I know that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are not taking corporate money. I believe that Sherrod Brown pretty much isn't. I think there's maybe a couple of other senators. And in the House, the Progressive Caucus is 90 people, 95 people, something like that. And out of 230, the entire House 435. So I guess that's not half.
Basically 3 or 4% in the Senate, and I mean, I think the reason I say that is because a lot of these really great progressive bills that Nancy Pelosi is moving up to the Senate for Mitch to kill. Mm-hmm. My question is, where were some of these gems? You think about Obama coming into office, the first thing he does, he lets Bush walk on war crimes. And then he brings a lot of Goldman Sachs type people into his admin. And in my estimation, he delivered so little to the people, the working class felt like, hey, we got to throw a Hail Mary and vote for Trump.
Let's cut President Obama some slack. He only had a filibuster-proof Senate for 74 days. He got a lot done during that 74 days, including Obamacare and a lot of other things. Andrew, thanks for the call. I'm just not a fan of the circular firing squad, or B, of picking on President Obama. He was a spectacular president in many regards. He granted he wasn't a progressive, but he was a good guy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 18 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back, Mark in Philadelphia. Hey, Mark, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? Big fan, first-time caller.
Thank you. Thanks for watching Free Speech, too.
Yep, Free Speech is great. I'm a Seth Miller fan, too. Quick comment and a quick question. My comment is he probably hired Alan Dershowitz to drive the Bronco down Pennsylvania Avenue.
To drive the what down Pennsylvania Avenue?
The Bronco.
Oh.
Alan Dershowitz, didn't he do the...
Oh, that's right, OJ. Yeah, I got it. I'm sorry.
Maybe he's
Took me a minute.
with a Bronco chase. Anyhow, my question is, doesn't the House of Representatives still have the power to impeach other elected officials, like a vice president or attorney general?
Yes, any federal official. Yes.
So, I mean, no matter how this works out with President Trump, I mean, they could impeach Pence or Pompeo or even Rick Perry, right?
Or Barr. Yeah, Perry's no longer impeachable because he's no longer in office. He resigned as soon as the Ukraine stuff started to hit the fan.
Anybody on the federal payroll who might be involved in this conspiracy or perjured himself or obstructed justice can be impeached after this.
That's correct. That's correct. It's just extremely unlikely. I mean, I think there's only been something like 15 impeachments that made it all the way to a trial in the Senate in the history of the Republic. It's very, very rare. There's been one serious effort at a Supreme Court justice. There have been now 3 efforts at a president. And then there's been a bunch of, I think the rest of them have been mostly appeals court judges.
Okay, but we still have the power to do it. That's what I wanted to know.
Yes, we still have the power to do it, so you can push for it. Thanks a lot for the call, Mark. Good to hear from you. Jerry in Gaylord, Michigan. Hey, Jerry, what's up?
Oh, hi. Very happy to talk to you. I was wondering about the increase in minimum wage. Like our caller earlier, 81, mentioned that it was, I forgot, very low, and we keep going up and up on minimum wage.
Well, actually, the federal minimum wage is still $7.25. This is the longest period without an increase in the federal minimum wage in history.
I agree with you, but won't it just raise prices?
No, it doesn't.
Corporate people will say,
Jerry,
well, now they got more money, we can raise the price a little bit.
No, it's not. That's not how it works, Jerry. Jerry, stop for a minute. I challenge you. The minimum wage was put into place in the mid-1930s. I think it was 1935. It might have been 1936. And the minimum wage has been raised somewhere in the neighborhood of the high 20s or low 30s, like somewhere between 27 and 33 times since then. So you should be able to identify a year or a couple of years where the minimum wage went up and inflation went up. Seems like it would be fairly simple, right? I guarantee you, Jerry, if that had ever happened, every Republican in America would have that year memorized. They would be saying, you don't want to have happen what happened in 1963 because they raised the minimum wage by 3% and we saw inflation go up by 6%. It's never happened. What happens is that when you raise the minimum wage, it stimulates the economy, but it doesn't increase prices. Period. It's a complete canard. It's total BS. It's a Republican talking point, and there's nothing to back it up.
That's what I thought made prices go up. Increase the minimum wage.
No, what makes prices go up is, number one, the average family in America right now is paying about $4,000 more than they need to in prices because of concentration of corporations, because of cartelization and monopolization of industries, particularly in air, in food, in air travel, things like that. These industries, internet services, telephone services, all of these things are 2 or 3 times more expensive in the United States than they are in most countries like in Europe where they allow competition. So that's the main thing that drives it, Jerry. We'll be back. Welcome back. Daryl in Lancaster, Wisconsin. Hey, Daryl, what's on your mind today?
I'm good, Mr. Hartman. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
I think we're pretty close to the same age. When I opened my first savings account in 1957, they were paying, I believe, 5%. Now I'm lucky if I can get 1.5%.
Right.
Is there anything that we can do about that? Before Reagan, we could even write off our credit cards.
Right.
We took that away.
Right.
It's so frustrating to keep my savings in an account and not draw anything out. I don't have enough. I'm 72 years old and retired. I don't have enough to play with the market. I'm scared to death of that.
Right.
So what do we do?
I know. I have the same conundrum. It's like, I'm buying CDs, from my credit union because, I can get 1.8%. It's like if I tie it up for a year. But
Can I remind you of something?
Yeah.
Can I remind you of something?
Sure.
Mr. Hartmann, back in 96 and 97, you asked the question. You said, have you ever been out in your yard alone and asked the question, am I alone? That question changed my life.
Okay.
My nearest neighbor is a quarter mile away in any direction, and they're Mennonite.
Mm-hmm.
So listening to you coming home one winter night, it had to be after 11 o'clock. It wasn't on this channel. I believe it was WLS, I think. You brought that up. So a couple of days later, I was out with the dogs, and I thought, okay, I'm going to ask this question. Am I alone? I didn't get an answer. But, boy, the feeling I've carried with me since that night.
Wow, that's great, Daryl. That is great. Speaking of interest rates, what happened was in 1999, Congress blew up the Glass-Steagall Act, which was put into place in 1933 to prevent banks, checkbook savings banks, what are called commercial banks, the banks where you have a checking account or a savings account, to prevent those kinds of banks from taking your and my checking account and savings accounts and gambling in the stock market with that money. They said if you want to gamble in the stock market, if you want to be that kind of bank like Merrill Lynch used to be, which is called an investment bank, you cannot offer checkbooks and savings accounts. And if you're a checkbook savings bank and mortgage bank, you can't gamble in the stock market. You have to have them separate. And that was the law from 33, as I recall, right up until 1999. And then with the Securities Modernization Act of 1999, they blew up Glass-Steagall, which set us up for another great crash because, that's what caused the great crash in 1929. That great crash happened in 2008. But instead of fixing the system, instead of banning this kind of activity by these banks, instead what has happened, what was done by the Bush administration, by and large, when the crash happened, was they started pouring money into the giant banks and allowing them to reconsolidate. And so we're still in that crash. We are still in an economic crisis echoing from 2008. And what the Fed has been doing is driving down interest rates as a way of keeping economic activity going and keeping commercial activity going and keeping the banks profitable. And it's like it's a Ponzi scheme, Daryl, and it's going to fall apart. But that's why interest rates are so low. Is that's the only way they've been able to prevent the economy from completely crashing. And what they're doing is they're postponing the inevitable, and it's going to get worse and worse every day that goes by. Daryl, it's so nice to hear from you. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for your kind words. And thanks for listening to SiriusXM. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes, coming up on 28 minutes past the hour here in the Thom Hartmann Program. Jeffrey Epstein's former defense lawyer is now going to defend Donald Trump in the impeachment hearings. This should get interesting. Boy, strange stuff going on. We'll be right back. It's, as I said, coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism. For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war, war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition Now. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And just to correct that, I'll be in Minneapolis on the 23rd, Sunday the 23rd, not Saturday the 22nd. My apologies. We'll get that promo recut for Monday. Sometimes things just fall through the cracks. Let's see here. Larry in Gary, Indiana. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Speaking of books, I read your Revolution of 1800 and a good bit about Jeffersonian views. And the Jeffersonians held legislative power most of the way for the first half of the century there. I know they were anti-corporation and, giving corporate power to organizations, yet corporations multiplied geometrically during that period. What do you attribute that to?
Capitalism. Yes, Jefferson strongly argued to Madison when they were putting the Constitution together that not only should there be a Bill of Rights, but that the Bill of Rights should include a ban on commercial monopolies or monopolies in commerce was the phrase that he used. And he repeated that in numerous letters where he was lobbying all these other people as they were writing the Constitution. He lost on that. He also had this vision of America as an agricultural country, and Hamilton. And Hamilton's vision famously was as an industrial country. And so, people, I think the old cliche is that, we quote Jefferson about politics, but we live in Alexander Hamilton's country. And, when Hamilton was Treasury Secretary for George Washington and in 1791 presented his 11-point plan for basically the industrialization of America, and Jefferson was the Secretary of State in that administration, it took. And, by 1793, I think at least 10 of Hamilton's 11 points had either been made into law or put into place with executive order. Certainly by 1800, it was all solidly in place and stayed there right up until, we started taking apart, our trade policies in the 1980s and early 1990s with things like NAFTA. But, that's how it happened, Gary.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. Chuck in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Chuck, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Did you see that Huffington Post article about the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed that climate change lawsuit brought against the federal government by 21 children?
They dismissed it?
And young adults.
When?
They dismissed it. The story just came out today, but it says because those kids bringing the lawsuit have a lack of legal standing.
Oh, geez. Basically the basis of the lawsuit was, in fact, we've had Professor Wood on this program, Mary Wood, who's a professor at the university there in Eugene, where you are, and Julia Olson, yeah, who was the lawyer litigating this thing. We've had them on this program. And I talk about the lawsuit. In fact, there's a chapter about that lawsuit in my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, on the assumption that it might make its way to the Supreme Court. I'm very disappointed that the Ninth Circuit dismissed it. Was that en banc? Was that the whole court? Or were they still before the three-judge tribunal?
It just says the panel reluctantly concluded that the plaintiff's case must be made in the political branches or to the electorate at large.
Yeah,
the court wrote.
I'll have to do a little digging on that, and I'll get back with you all on Monday on that. But that's very disappointing because that case really had tremendous potential. Sorry?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you on your book on the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Did you go to these dirty tricks about the court can just say black is white and day is night, and we're just stuck with whatever the court says? Oh yeah, in the book I'm laying out the scam of originalism, because it is a scam. It's just a total hustle, and how the court has been has basically subverted democracy in the United States in some really, really huge ways. And if you get a chance to read the book, Chuck, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Thanks a lot for the call. Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention about the Poor People's Marches that has been going on around the country. Mm-hmm.
And Reverend Barber.
And I wanted to, also mention, that what these Republicans and all are trying to hold on to, as well as these seats and stuff, is privatization. Excuse me. These words have not been used lately, to privatize, because to me this is what why the capitalists and the oligarchs are behind the Republican Party, is because they want to privatize our democracy, and this is why we have to truly take this year. I mean, in the elections, because this is what's going to happen. We're going to have to pay for everything, excuse me, if these people continue to get in office.
You're absolutely right, Maine. And this is not something that's new. It was brought back into the forefront of American politics and legislative efforts in the 1980s by Reagan. But back in 1920, Warren Harding ran for president in the election of 1920, and he won on the campaign platform of more business in government, less government in business, which means privatize, deregulate. And plus he also campaigned on dropping the top tax rate from 91%, which is where it was in 1920, down to 25%, which he did in the subsequent years, which kicked off the deregulation of the banks, and dropping the tax rate kicked off this explosion, this inflation, this huge bubble in the stock market that popped on October 29th, 1929, or October, whatever it was, 1929, and that was that was the end of the Roaring '20s and the beginning of the disaster. And I think we're looking at the same thing, Maine. I think it's going to play itself out all over again. Jerry in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call, Tom.
Sure.
I'm just wondering who is paying Rudy Giuliani for all his legal work.
Well, Lev Parnas paid him, I believe, $500,000 or some substantial six-figure amount of money. And that money that Lev Parnas paid Rudy Giuliani with apparently came from this Ukrainian oligarch who's hiding out in Austria, although the exact source of it is a little sketchy. Parnas also, illegally donated a couple $100,000 to one of Donald Trump's super PACs. That's what he's being charged with. That's what he was arrested for. So, but I find it bizarre that Giuliani is running around saying that he's in the employ of Donald Trump when Donald Trump is not paying him, but Lev Parnas was paying him, and supposedly Lev Parnas works for him. Just the whole thing is bizarre. And, I suspect that we're going to learn more about this as time goes on. Thanks a lot for the call, Jerry. Sharon in Brown Valley, California. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
I keep hearing that there is no constitutional right to vote, and I tend to disagree due to the first 10 words of the 19th Amendment, which are completely unnecessary if there's no such thing as a right to vote. And those 10 words are the right of citizens of the United States to vote. It goes on to say, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex.
Right. Right. That was the amendment that allowed women to vote.
Correct.
So you've got that, allowing women to vote. You've got the 13th Amendment, which allowed African American men to vote. So you've got
it's worded entirely differently. It does not address a right to vote. The 13th Amendment does not address a right to vote per se.
Right.
This says the right.
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking the 15th Amendment. But yeah, no, I get your point. And Sharon, it would require, unfortunately, the Supreme Court to hear a case based on your argument, which I think is possibly very strong, and to rule on it, because basically nowadays we have a Supreme Court. The judges on the Supreme Court are the monarchs of America. They have final say on absolutely everything, and that has not been adjudicated. And like I said, if you look at the Bush v. Gore decision in 2000, you can read right there where William Rehnquist says, the Chief Justice says, there is no right to vote for President of the United States. Now, he was speaking at the Electoral College, but because that's indirectly voting for the president. But I don't know of anywhere where the Supreme Court has ever said that there's an explicit right to vote. It should be adjudicated. Sharon, thank you for that. I appreciate it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Well, I get calls like Sharon's, and I think I am so privileged to be hanging out with some of the smartest people in this country. I really appreciate you guys. We'll be right back. And welcome back. I'm just reading this article about the striking down of the Giuliani case. It was the three-judge panel. It reversed Ann Aiken's. Yeah. Okay. And there was a lengthy dissent. I'll have to get into this in a little bit, but anyhow, Carrie in New Windsor, New York. Hey, Carrie, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Yeah, the Women's March that only happens once a year is happening on Saturday.
Really?
And
how did I miss that?
It's tomorrow, everybody.
Tomorrow,
so please come on out. Yeah, and then if Bernie actually said something like, "I changed my mind. I don't think a woman can beat Trump." What if he comes out and says, "You know what? I said that, and you know what else? I kind of want," then everybody is saying that Warren is lying.
I'm assuming, Carrie, that they are both telling the truth. That Bernie said something like, for example, Donald Trump is going to weaponize whatever he can. He will use gender against a woman, and it will make it harder for a woman to win or something like that than a man, which I think is probably a true statement. And Warren interpreted that as Bernie saying that a woman couldn't beat Trump. And that wasn't what Bernie said, or it wasn't what he meant, but it was what she thought she heard. And I think that she actually thinks he said it. And I think, and I know that he would not say something like that, the way that she's characterized it.
It's two different things. It's one thing to say a woman can't be elected. It's another thing to say a woman can't beat Trump. Because in a third of all countries in this world, there have been women leaders. So it is possible.
Oh, I'm not even saying that Bernie said that a woman can't beat Trump. I think he probably said it would be harder.
Well, just on the other hand, I got to say that, I think Bernie knows better than to say, that his reasoning for not saying what maybe he said is because Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Trump.
Exactly.
She didn't win. So that point, and you know why she didn't win? Mostly why she didn't win, even though she got 3 million more votes than Trump, is mostly because of the system, the electoral system that's set up probably mostly by men.
I think she didn't. I think she didn't carry the Electoral College because of voter suppression in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan,
no, that too, which is not probably a choice of women.
Wisconsin.
Women probably don't do voter suppression. You know what I'm saying? The entire electoral system
No, I'm talking about in Wisconsin, Scott Walker threw a couple 100,000 people off the voting rolls just before the election. In Michigan, Rick Snyder threw a couple 100,000 people off the voting rolls. In Ohio, John Kasich threw a couple 100,000 people off the voting rolls. And in Pennsylvania, and I forget who was the governor of Pennsylvania at that time, they threw over 100,000 people off the voting rolls. And in each one of those states, Trump's margin of victory, assuming you can trust the electronic voting machines, Trump's margin of victory was less than 20,000 votes in every one of those states.
I have a question for you. What would happen to a candidate if they said a brown-skinned person couldn't beat Trump or couldn't be elected, and then they denied it? Would brown-skinned people let it go like Liz did?
I don't think so, but that's my point, Carrie. I had an official of the California Democratic Party on this show in 2008. Saying, who was African American, saying that we should be voting for Hillary Clinton in 2008 because Barack Obama couldn't win because he was black. It's like, people offer opinions all the time, but I am, and I think we all should believe the best of both of these two people. That some conversation happened and it was taken differently by both of them. It happens all the time. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Steve in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hello, Mr. Hartmann. With all the charges pending against the president, shouldn't he be disqualified from running again?
Well, if he gets impeached, the Constitution says that once you've been impeached, you may never again run for any office. So, in fact, it says that you may not enjoy profit under the United States. And I doubt that it's ever been adjudicated. I don't know how that could be interpreted, but I was wondering if that would mean you can't even do business in the United States. But I mean, you look it up. It's, as I recall, I'd have to go back and look at the Constitution. I don't want to just pull it out of the top of my head, but it says that. It says so. If he is impeached, he will not only have to leave office, but he'll never be able to run for any other office again. Thanks a lot for the call, Steve. Greg in Delano, California. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. You are such a valuable resource, and I'm going to tap into that resource today, if I may. And I learned something from just about every show I watch. So, do you remember back when apparently some big mob stormed the White House or surrounded the White House when Nixon was in office, and he looked out the window and said something to the effect of, "They're here to get us."
That was, Henry Kissinger, I believe, told that story. And Nixon actually had been thinking about nuking Vietnam. He had proposed that to Kissinger, if I'm remembering this correctly. And that night, there was this huge demonstration on the Mall, and people marched over to the White House, and they surrounded the White House, and the White House was not insulated like it is now with all these gates and fences and things. And and Nixon looked out the window, and there was just this ocean of young people. And he decided that he couldn't nuke Vietnam as a consequence of that. That's the story that I remember. And I don't know if that's a true story, Greg, or if it's an apocryphal story, or if Henry Kissinger told the story. It's been a lot of years since I heard it, but that's my recollection.
Okay, well, I bring that up because I think it's time. If you remember Occupy Wall Street about 10 or 11 years ago, maybe it's time to occupy the White House. Maybe it's time for 1% of this population, which would be 3 million people, to do something, to stand up and do something in a large group. And,
my suspicion, Greg, is that if Trump is acquitted in the Senate, that there will probably be 1 million people in the streets in Washington, D.C., and I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about like the Women's March.
Exactly. No, the nonviolent solution is always the one that I go for. And matter of fact, if I may, 30 seconds, I'll read from a nonviolent communication book from Marshall Rosenberg, if you've ever heard of it. And he talks about sharing the sentiments of French novelist and journalist George Bernanos. And he says, I have thought for a long time now that if someday the increasing efficiency for the technique of destruction finally causes our species to disappear from the earth, it will not be cruelty that will be responsible for our extinction, but the docility, the lack of responsibility of the modern man, his base subservient acceptance of every common decree, the horrors that we have seen, and still greater, the horrors we shall presently see.
Yeah. I get it, Greg, and you know we try to discourage people from reading on the show, but I get your point, and I think that apathy is our greatest enemy. But I would bet that groups like MoveOn.org and Indivisible and whatnot are organizing right now for the probability that Trump will be let go. He'll win.
Very likely.
Yeah.
It just seems to me like
we need to be out in the streets when that happens. Greg, thanks a lot for the call. Mary in Panama City, Florida. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Hi. For one thing, I love your show.
Thank you.
It's very good, and I hope the Democrats get it back in.
There you go.
But I got another concern. Okay, I'm a waitress, and I worked at Walmart, and I see a lot of people that are hungry, that are homeless, people that they can't buy food, so they buy cat food and dog food to eat so they can get their meds. Now, my concern is why they have to put millions and millions of dollars into running for president of our country when they could be feeding these hungry people, these homeless people. We got homeless veterans out there, and it's sad.
Yes, I agree.
And I don't understand that kind of money going into running for president of the United States.
Well, you can thank the Supreme Court for that. In a couple of decisions in 76 and 78, the Supreme Court basically opened the floodgates to unlimited money. We used to have laws and regulations about this, and the Supreme Court blew them up. And we need to undo that. We need to change that. Thank you very much for the call. Carol in Eagan, Minnesota. Hey, Carol, what's up?
My little conspiracy theory on the election in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Number one, it is highly unusual for any candidate to win a precinct by less than 1% of the vote. In all three of those states, Donald Trump won multiple, and I forget the number, multiple precincts by less than 1% of the vote, and that tells me manual finagling of the votes within those states. I think there was one precinct that they pointed out where he won by 7 votes.
Yeah, that's why I always say, if you can trust the electronic voting machines and the debold tabulators, I don't trust them, frankly.
I don't, and I don't believe he won that. I don't believe that he legitimately won the election.
I don't either.
Even if it looks like it.
Yep. I completely agree with you, Carol. And that's my new book on the war, the hidden history of the war on voting, is in part about that. Absolutely. Thanks a lot for the call. Margie in Wisconsin Rapids. Margie, we have 30 seconds left. You got a quick one?
The BBC is reporting that Hong Kong Express Airways forced a female to take a pregnancy test before boarding a flight to the U.S.
Oh, really?
To ensure that they weren't violating our immigration laws.
On behalf of the Trump administration?
I don't know. It's in the BBC right now. This is what people are doing.
I'll go check it out.
Check it out.
Margie, thank you. Thanks for the heads up. I'm telling you, we got the smartest people in the world listening to this program. I am so grateful. Thanks so much for being with us this week. It's been a fascinating week. Next week is going to get even more interesting as the Senate starts the trial on Tuesday, and Mitch McConnell does everything he can to lock it down. No coverage, no reporting, no reporters. It's going to be fun. So anyhow, get out there, get active, tag You're It, and tell your friends about where and how they can find progressive media. We'll see you on Monday. Have a great weekend.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!
Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Saturday, February 22nd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.